The horse collapsed 20 feet from the porch, and the woman riding it barely managed to stumble free before the animal's legs buckled completely beneath its weight. Harrison Pike had been mending fence posts near the barn when he heard the desperate thunder of hooves approaching his property, and something in the frantic rhythm told him this was trouble long before he saw the rider. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house just as the woman fell to her knees in the dirt, her dark hair matted with sweat and dust, her dress torn at the shoulder and stained with what looked like dried blood. "Please," she gasped, looking up at him with wild green eyes that held equal parts terror and determination. "Please, they are coming. They will kill me." Harrison was 32 years old and had lived alone on his ranch outside Parowan, Utah for the better part of 8 years. In all that time, he had grown accustomed to solitude, to the steady rhythm of work and weather, to conversations with his horses and the occasional visit from neighboring ranchers. He was not accustomed to beautiful women collapsing on his property begging for their lives. "Who's coming?" He knelt beside her, his strong hands gripping her shoulders to steady her. She was shaking violently, whether from exhaustion or fear he could not tell. "The Fletcher brothers," she whispered, and Harrison felt his blood run cold at the name. Everyone in Iron County knew about the Fletcher gang. 5 brothers who had turned to outlawry after the war, leaving a trail of robberies, murders, and worse across southern Utah and northern Arizona. "They killed my father. They want to kill me too because I saw them do it." Harrison made his decision in less than a heartbeat. He lifted the woman into his arms, surprised at how light she was despite her height, and carried her toward the house. "How far behind you are they?" "I do not know. An hour maybe. I have been riding since dawn yesterday." He pushed through the front door and set her down on the worn sofa in his small parlor. The house was simple but clean, the home of a man who took pride in his surroundings even if no one else ever saw them. He moved to the window and scanned the horizon, seeing nothing but the familiar landscape of scrub brush and red rock that characterized this part of Utah territory. "What's your name?" he asked, already moving toward the gun cabinet in the corner. Margaret Carson." Her voice was stronger now, though still threaded with exhaustion. "My father owned a ranch south of here near Cedar City. The Fletchers came 3 days ago demanding money. Papa told them to leave. They shot him in front of me." Harrison pulled down his Winchester rifle and began loading it with quick, practiced movements. "Why didn't you go to the marshal in Cedar City?" "Because Thomas Fletcher is the marshal's cousin. Papa told me before that they protect each other. He said if anything ever happened, I should run as far as I could." Margaret pushed herself up on the sofa, wincing as she moved. "I am sorry to bring this trouble to your door. If you give me water and let me rest just an hour, I will move on. You're not going anywhere." Harrison's voice was firm as he moved to check the load in his revolver. "And I'm not letting those murderers have you." Something in his tone made Margaret look at him properly for the first time. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders built by years of hard work. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples fell across his forehead, and his jaw was covered with several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark brown and steady, the eyes of a man who meant what he said. "You do not even know me," she said softly. "Don't need to. I know the Fletchers, and I know what they do to witnesses." He moved to the door and bolted it, then went around checking the windows. The house had been built with defense in mind, as many ranch houses were in this territory. The windows were small and high, and the walls were thick adobe that would stop most bullets. "Can you shoot?" Margaret stood swaying slightly. "Yes, Papa taught me." "Good. Harrison handed her a loaded revolver. "If they get past me, you use that. Aim for the chest, not the head. Bigger target." The reality of the situation seemed to settle over Margaret like a heavy blanket. She looked down at the gun in her hand, then back up at Harrison. "Why are you doing this? You could tell them you never saw me. They would believe you." Harrison walked over to where she stood and looked down into her face. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her features. The dried tear tracks through the dust on her cheeks, the purple bruise forming along her jaw that he had not noticed before. Something twisted in his chest, a protective instinct he had not felt in years, not since his sister had died of fever during the war. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "Now sit down before you fall down. When did you last eat?" "I do not remember." Margaret sank back onto the sofa, the revolver heavy in her lap. "Yesterday morning, maybe." Harrison moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out bread, cold meat, and cheese. As he worked, he kept glancing out the window, watching for the telltale dust cloud that would signal riders approaching. His mind was racing through options and scenarios. The Fletchers were dangerous men, but they were not particularly smart. If they came charging and expecting an easy target, he might be able to surprise them. He brought the food to Margaret and watched as she fell on it with barely restrained desperation. While she ate, he filled a cup with water from the pump and set it beside her. "When you're done eating, I want you to tell me everything. How many brothers are chasing you? Are they alone or do they have other men with them?" Margaret finished chewing and took a long drink of water. "3 of them are following me. Thomas stayed in Cedar City to keep up appearances as marshal. The oldest, Marcus, was shot in a bank robbery last month and is recovering in Arizona, or so I heard. So it is James, William, and Cyrus. Just the 3. "Just 3, Harrison repeated with a grim smile. "Any other men riding with them? Not that I saw. They seem to prefer working alone as a family." Margaret set down the cup and met his eyes. "Why are you smiling?" "Because 3 men, even Fletcher men, can be handled if you know what you're doing." Harrison moved back to the window. "I was a cavalry scout during the war. Spent 3 years tracking Confederate raiders through Missouri and Arkansas. I know how to make a stand." "You were Union." Margaret's voice held surprise. "Utah sent men to both sides, though mostly Union. I was born in Illinois, came west after the war." He paused, still watching the horizon. "My parents had died of cholera, my sister died in '63, and I had nothing left back east. Figured I'd start fresh out here where the land was cheap and the past didn't matter so much." "I am sorry about your family." Harrison shrugged, though the gesture held old pain. "Long time ago now." "Tell me about yours. Your father had a ranch, a small one. Just cattle, nothing fancy." "Mama died when I was 12, so it was just Papa and me for the last 10 years. He taught me everything about running a ranch, how to keep books, how to judge livestock, how to handle a branding iron." Margaret's voice caught. "He was a good man. He did not deserve what they did to him." "No one deserves that." Harrison turned from the window to look at her. In the light filtering through the small windows, he could see her more clearly now. She was probably in her early 20s, with a strong face that spoke of character rather than conventional prettiness. Her hands were calloused from work, and there was a steadiness in her gaze that he recognized, the look of someone who had learned to depend on themselves. They sat in tense silence for the next hour. Margaret finished eating and then cleaned herself up as best she could with water from the basin Harrison provided. She washed the blood from her hands and face, tried to pin up her hair with trembling fingers, and checked the revolver to make sure she understood how it worked. Harrison spent the time preparing the house for defense. He dragged his heavy oak desk over to reinforce the door, positioned himself near the front window where he had the best view of the approach to the house, and laid out extra ammunition where he could reach it quickly. "They may not come at all," Margaret said quietly from her position by the side window. "Maybe I lost them, maybe." Harrison did not sound convinced. "But the Fletchers have a reputation for being persistent. If they tracked you this far, they are not going to give up easy." As if summoned by his words, Margaret suddenly stiffened. "Riders, 3 of them coming from the south." Harrison moved to look. Sure enough, 3 men on horseback were approaching at a steady pace, spread out in a line that suggested they expected trouble. Even at this distance, he could see the rifles across their saddles and the way they rode with the easy confidence of men who had never faced real opposition. "That's them," Margaret whispered, her face going pale. "James is the one in the middle on the bay horse. William is to his left, and Cyrus is the youngest, on the right." Harrison studied the approaching men carefully. James Fletcher looked to be in his late 30s, a big man with a full beard and a hat pulled low over his eyes. William was leaner, with a mean look even from a distance. Cyrus could not have been more than 25, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested he was just as dangerous as his older brothers. "Stay down and stay quiet unless I tell you otherwise," Harrison said, his voice calm despite the tension coiling in his gut. "Let me do the talking." The 3 men reined in their horses about 50 yards from the house, just out of easy rifle range. Smart, Harrison thought. They had done this before. James Fletcher raised his hand in what might have been a friendly gesture if not for the rifle held casually in his other hand. "Hello, the house," James called out. "We're looking for a woman. Dark hair, about 22 years old, riding a gray mare. She's wanted for theft and we're authorized to bring her back to Cedar City." Harrison did not move from his position by the window, but he raised his voice to Carrie. "This is private property. You have no authority here. Now, friend, don't be unfriendly. We've been tracking this girl for 2 days and we know she came this direction. Her horse is right there by your barn unless I miss my guess." James gestured toward the collapsed gray mare. "So why don't you just send her out and we'll be on our way? No need for any trouble." "The only trouble here is 3 men with guns on my land without invitation. I'm giving you one chance to turn around and ride out." Harrison kept his rifle pointed toward the ground but visible in the window frame. William Fletcher, the lean one, spat tobacco juice and called out, "You know who you're talking to, Cowboy. We're the Fletcher brothers. That girl in there murdered our cousin in cold blood. We got every right to take her in. She says you murdered her father. I'm inclined to believe her story over yours." Harrison shifted his grip on the rifle slightly. "Last warning, leave now." Cyrus, the youngest, laughed. 3 against 1 and you're giving us warnings. You must be simple in the head. 3 against 2, Harrison corrected. "And I was a cavalry scout. You really want to find out how many of you I can drop before you make it to the house?" There was a moment of silence as the Fletcher brothers considered this. Harrison watched them carefully, reading their body language. James was the leader, that was clear, but he was also the most cautious. William was angry, his hand tightening on his rifle. Cyrus was young and cocky, the most likely to do something stupid. "You're making a big mistake," James finally called out. "We can wait you out. You got to come out sometime. I've got a well, a pantry full of food and nothing but time. You're the one sitting out in the open." To emphasize his point, Harrison casually shifted his rifle to point in their general direction. "Of course, if you want to try rushing the house, go ahead. These adobe walls are 3 feet thick. They'll stop your bullets just fine. How good is your cover out there?" He saw William say something to James, saw James shake his head. They were arguing. Good. Dissension in the ranks was always useful. After another moment, James raised his hand again. "All right, Cowboy. You want to play it that way. But you should know, Thomas Fletcher is the marshal in Cedar City. When we tell him you're harboring a murderer, he'll come with a posse and burn you out legal-like. If Marshal Fletcher is half the lawman he pretends to be, he'll investigate what really happened to Carson instead of taking his cousin's word for it." Harrison kept his voice level. "Now get off my land before I stop being polite." The three men turned their horses and rode back the way they had come, but only about 100 yards before stopping. Harrison watched them dismount and start setting up what looked like a camp. They were not leaving. They were settling in for a siege. "They are staying," Margaret said quietly from behind him. She had moved up to watch despite his instructions to stay down. "Figured they might." Harrison lowered his rifle and turned to look at her. "But they won't stay long. 3 men can't maintain a siege indefinitely, and they know it. They'll either give up or try something stupid, probably tonight. What do we do until then? We wait, we watch, and we make a plan." Harrison moved to the kitchen area and started preparing coffee. The afternoon was wearing on toward evening, and it was going to be a long night. "Tell me about the ranch your father owned. What happens to it now?" Margaret sat down heavily on one of the wooden chairs at his small table. "I do not know. Papa had no other family. I suppose it belongs to me if I live long enough to claim it, but I do not know how I would run it alone." "You said you know how to run a ranch." "I know the work, yes, but the hands we employed, they will not take orders from a woman, and without Papa, I have no authority to hire new men or make contracts." Margaret's voice was bitter. "The world is not set up for women to own property alone, even out here where you would think things might be different." Harrison poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought them to the table. He sat down across from her, his long legs stretched out in front of him. Outside, the light was beginning to fade toward the long shadows of evening. "Things are changing slowly," he said. "Wyoming gave women the vote last year. Maybe Utah will follow. Maybe it will get easier. Maybe." Margaret wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for the heat despite the lingering warmth of the day. "Or maybe I will die tonight and none of it will matter." "You're not going to die." Harrison's voice was firm. "I won't let that happen. You do not know me. You have no reason to risk your life for mine." Harrison was quiet for a moment, looking down into his coffee. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "When I came back from the war, I thought I was done with fighting, done with violence and death. I bought this land and built this house and told myself I'd live out my days in peace, hurting no one and letting no one hurt me." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "But peace isn't worth anything if it means turning away someone in need. My sister, before she died, she made me promise I'd always help people if I could. I haven't had much occasion to keep that promise until now." Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "What was your sister's name?" "Hannah." "She was younger than me by 3 years. Sweetest person you'd ever meet, always helping people, always seeing the best in everyone." Harrison smiled, though there was sadness in it. "She caught fever while volunteering at a field hospital. Died in a tent surrounded by strangers while I was off chasing raiders 100 miles away. I didn't even know she was sick until she was already buried. I am so sorry. Like I said, long time ago." Harrison stood and moved back to the window. The Fletcher brothers had a fire going now, and he could see them moving around it. "But I think about her every day, about the promises I made and the ones I kept. This one I'm keeping." They settled into an uneasy routine as darkness fell. Harrison kept watch from the front window while Margaret took the side window, both of them scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The moon was waxing gibbous, bright enough to cast shadows but not bright enough to illuminate everything. It was the kind of night that made defenders nervous. Around midnight, Margaret's head began to nod despite her best efforts. She had been running on pure fear and determination for nearly 2 days, and now that she was relatively safe, exhaustion was catching up with her. "Go sleep," Harrison said quietly. "Take the bed in the back room. I'll wake you if anything happens. I should keep watch. You can barely keep your eyes open. You're no good to either of us if you collapse." He gestured toward the back of the house. "Go on. I'm used to late nights." Margaret wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She made her way to the bedroom, a small space with a simple bed covered in quilts. She lay down fully clothed, the revolver on the table beside her, and was asleep in seconds. Harrison kept his vigil through the night. Around 3 in the morning, he saw movement near the barn. Someone, probably Cyrus based on the size, was trying to sneak closer under cover of darkness. Harrison aimed carefully and fired a single shot that kicked up dirt 5 feet in front of the sneaking figure. The person scrambled back to cover immediately. "Next one won't miss." Harrison called out into the darkness. There was no response, but there were also no further attempts to approach the house. Harrison allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. They were testing him, seeing if he really could shoot. Now they knew. The sun rose slowly over the red rock landscape, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Margaret woke to the smell of bacon frying and stumbled out of the bedroom to find Harrison cooking breakfast as calmly as if there were not 3 killers camped on his property. "You should have woken me," she said, feeling guilty. "You needed the rest more than I needed the company." Harrison gestured to the table. "Sit. Food will be ready soon." They ate in companionable silence, and Margaret found herself studying the man who had taken her in. In the morning light, she could see the details she had missed the day before. The calluses on his hands from years of hard work. The scar along his jawline that looked old and faded. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was not often but suggested he had once been a man who laughed easily. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked, catching her staring. Margaret felt her cheeks warm. "I was thinking that I owe you my life, and I do not even know anything about you except that you were a soldier and you live alone. Not much else to know. I'm a rancher. I raise cattle and horses, sell them when I can, and try to make enough to keep the place running. It's a simple life, but it's mine." Harrison pushed his empty plate away. "What about you? What did you want to do with your life before all this happened?" "I wanted what Papa wanted, to build the ranch into something successful, to maybe find a good man and have a family someday." Margaret's voice grew quiet. "Simple things, nothing grand." Simple things are usually the best things. Before Margaret could respond, a voice called out from outside. "Cowboy, we need to talk." Harrison moved to the window. James Fletcher was standing alone about 30 yards from the house, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "I'm willing to listen," Harrison called back. "This is getting us nowhere," James shouted. "We can't get to you, you can't get rid of us. How about we make a deal?" "What kind of deal?" "You give us the girl, we leave you alone. No harm to you, no trouble with the marshal. You go back to your life like none of this happened." Harrison glanced at Margaret, who had gone pale but met his eyes steadily. He turned back to the window. "And what happens to her?" "She faces justice for killing our cousin." "Your cousin isn't dead. Her father is." Harrison kept his voice calm. "I'll make you a counter-offer. You ride into Cedar City and tell the territorial marshal what really happened. Let him investigate. If it turns out she's guilty of anything, I'll bring her in myself." James laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You really are a fool. There's no way that's happening." "Then we're at an impasse." Harrison shifted his rifle. "You boys might want to think about moving on. This is wasting your time and mine." You'll have to come out eventually. When you do, we'll be waiting. Then you better get comfortable." James Fletcher stood there for another moment, then turned and walked back to where his brothers waited. Harrison watched him go, his jaw tight. Margaret moved up beside him. "They are never going to leave, are they?" she asked quietly, not willingly. Harrison turned to look at her. "Which means we need to do something they're not expecting." "Like what?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, thinking. "How good are you on a horse?" "Very good. Papa taught me to ride almost before I could walk." "Good. Because tonight, when it's darkest, we're going to make a run for it. Head north toward Parowan proper. There's a territorial ranger station there, about 15 miles up the road. If we can make it there, the Fletchers will have to back off. 15 miles at night with 3 men hunting us." Margaret shook her head. "That is suicide." "Maybe, but staying here is slow suicide. They'll wait us out, wear us down, and eventually we'll make a mistake. Better to take the fight to them on our terms." Harrison moved to check his saddle and tack, hanging near the back door. "I've got a good horse, strong and fast. You take him. I'll take my backup mount. We leave 2 hours before dawn when they're least expecting it. We ride hard and fast, and we don't stop for anything. You have thought this through. It's what I do. Cavalry scouts learn to think 3 steps ahead, or they died young." Harrison pulled down his saddle and began checking the leather for wear. "I'll teach you the route this afternoon so you know where to go if we get separated. You stay on the main road north, follow it through the canyon. The ranger station is on the right side, brick building with a green door. You tell them everything and they'll protect you." Margaret watched him work, her heart pounding. The plan was dangerous, maybe even crazy, but it was better than sitting here waiting to die. "What if they catch us? Then we fight. But they won't catch us if we do this right." Harrison looked up at her, and there was a fierceness in his eyes that made her believe him. "Trust me." "I do," Margaret said, and realized she meant it. She had known this man for barely a day, but she trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone except her father. There was something solid about Harrison Pike, something unshakable. He said he would protect her, and she believed he would die trying if necessary. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Harrison showed Margaret his horses, 2 sturdy quarter horses named Thunder and Storm. Thunder was the bigger of the 2, a dark bay with white stockings and an intelligent eye. Storm was smaller but faster, a roan with endless stamina. "You take Thunder," Harrison said, stroking the horse's neck. "He'll take care of you, just give him his head and he'll run all night if needed." They checked and rechecked their supplies. Water canteens filled to the brim, dried meat and biscuits wrapped in cloth, extra ammunition for both rifle and revolver. Harrison even packed a blanket and a small medical kit, thinking ahead to every possibility. As evening fell, they forced themselves to eat a good meal and then pretended to settle in for the night as usual. Harrison lit the lantern in the front room so the Fletchers could see shadows moving inside, maintaining the illusion of a normal evening. But he and Margaret were both fully dressed, their boots on, ready to move at a moment's notice. Around midnight, Harrison quietly extinguished the lantern. They waited in darkness, letting their eyes adjust. Outside, they could see the faint glow of the Fletcher brothers' campfire, could occasionally hear the low murmur of voices carrying on the still night air. "They will have someone on watch," Margaret whispered. "Probably. But whoever it is will be watching the front of the house, not the back where the barn is." Harrison moved to the back door, listening intently. "We slip out quiet, get the horses saddled without making noise, and then we ride like hell. By the time they realize what's happening, we'll have a good head start. And if they realize before then we ride even faster." Harrison tried to make it sound light, but they both knew how dangerous this was going to be. He looked at Margaret in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. Last chance to think of a better plan. I cannot think of anything better. Let us do it. They moved to the back door. Harrison eased it open inch by inch, the hinges creaking softly despite his care. The night air was cool and smelled of sage and dust. In the distance, a coyote howled. They crept toward the barn, staying low and moving as quietly as possible. Harrison's heart was pounding so hard he was sure the Fletchers would hear it from across the property. Every snapped twig, every rustle of cloth sounded impossibly loud in the stillness. Inside the barn, the horses nickered softly in greeting. Harrison put his hand on Thunder's nose, silencing him. "Easy, boy. We need you to be quiet." They saddled both horses with practiced efficiency, their hands working quickly in the darkness. Margaret was good, Harrison noticed. Her movements were sure and steady despite the fear that must be coursing through her. She had been raised around horses, and it showed. Harrison led Storm to the back door of the barn while Margaret followed with Thunder. He paused there, listening. From the front of his property he could hear the faint sounds of the Fletcher camp. Someone coughed. A horse stamped. "Ready," he whispered. Margaret nodded, her face pale but determined in the moonlight. "Then let's ride." They mounted quickly and spurred their horses forward into the night. The animals leaped into motion, their hooves thundering against the hard, packed earth. Behind them, Harrison heard a shout of alarm. The Fletchers had heard them. "Go, go, go," Harrison yelled, no longer needing to be quiet. Thunder and Storm stretched out into a full gallop, eating up the ground with long strides. The night flashed past in a blur of shadows and moonlight. Margaret leaned low over Thunder's neck, the horse responding to her commands beautifully. Harrison kept pace beside her, glancing back over his shoulder. He saw muzzle flashes in the darkness behind them, heard the crack of rifles firing. But they were already too far away, moving too fast. The bullets went wide. "They are coming," Margaret shouted over the thunder of hooves. "Let them," Harrison called back. "We've got a good head start and better horses." They raced through the night, following the road north as it wound through the rocky landscape. The moon provided just enough light to see by, but it also meant the Fletchers could track them. Harrison pushed Storm harder, and Thunder kept pace easily. The horses were fresh and strong, while the Fletcher brothers' mounts had been ridden hard for days. After about 3 miles, Harrison risked another glance back. He could see the 3 riders pursuing them, but they were falling behind. The distance was growing. "We are losing them," Margaret shouted, her voice filled with hope. "Don't celebrate yet. We've got 12 more miles to go." They rode on through the night, the landscape slowly changing around them. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, then to the mouth of a canyon where the road narrowed and walls of red rock rose on either side. Harrison had traveled this road many times and knew every twist and turn, but it was still treacherous in the darkness. "Stay close to me," he called to Margaret. "The road gets tricky here." They slowed slightly as they entered the canyon, the horses picking their way carefully over loose stones. The walls rose high on either side, blocking out much of the moonlight. It was darker here, more enclosed, and Harrison felt the familiar prickle of unease that came from being trapped in a confined space. A shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. Harrison felt something tug at his sleeve and realized a bullet had passed close enough to graze the fabric of his shirt. The Fletchers were still in range. "Faster," he urged Margaret, spurring Storm forward. They burst out of the narrow section of the canyon into a wider area where the road ran alongside a dry stream bed. The moonlight returned, bright enough to see clearly now. Harrison looked back and swore. The Fletcher brothers had gained ground in the canyon, and now they were close enough that he could see their faces. "Listen to me," he called to Margaret. "See that ridge ahead on the left? When I say go, you turn thunder and ride straight for it. Get behind those rocks and get your rifle ready." "What about you?" "I'm going to slow them down. When I say go, you ride. Do you understand?" "Harrison, no, do you understand?" His voice was hard now, commanding. Yes. They rode another 100 yards. The ridge loomed ahead, a tumble of large boulders that would provide good cover. Harrison counted in his head, calculating distances and angles the way he had learned during the war. "Now, go!" Margaret wrenched Thunder's reins to the left, and the horse responded instantly, leaping off the road and racing toward the ridge. Harrison pulled Storm to a sliding stop, wheeling the horse around to face their pursuers. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard and took aim. The Fletcher brothers were charging forward, spread out in a line, their rifles raised. They had not expected him to stop and turn. Harrison fired 3 times in rapid succession, working the lever action with practiced speed. His first shot took William Fletcher's horse in the chest, and the animal went down in a tumbling crash that sent its rider flying. His second shot passed between James and Cyrus, making them both flinch and pull their horses aside. His third shot took Cyrus's hat clean off his head. Then Harrison was riding again, spurring Storm toward the ridge where Margaret waited. Bullets kicked up dirt around him, but none found their mark. He reached the rocks and practically leaped from his horse, grabbing his rifle and diving behind cover as more shots rang out. Margaret was already positioned behind a large boulder, her own rifle trained on the road. "Are you insane?" she demanded. "Probably," Harrison admitted, breathing hard. He peered around his rock and saw the Fletchers taking cover along the stream bed about 50 yards away. William was climbing to his feet, limping but apparently uninjured despite his horse's fall. "But I bought us some time. They can't charge us directly now. We have the high ground. Now what? Now we wait for daylight. Once the sun comes up, we move. The ranger station is only about 3 miles from here. We can make it if we stay smart." They settled in behind the rocks as the night slowly faded toward dawn. The Fletchers took occasional shots at them, but they were firing at shadows and none of the bullets came close. Harrison and Margaret did not return fire, conserving their ammunition. As the sky began to lighten in the east, Harrison could see their situation more clearly. The Fletchers had them pinned down, but the cover was good and the brothers could not get close without exposing themselves. It was a stalemate, but one that worked in their favor as long as they did not do anything foolish. "I need to tell you something," Margaret said quietly as they waited. "In case we do not make it, we are going to make it. But in case we do not." She turned to look at him, her green eyes serious in the growing light. "I want you to know that meeting you, having you help me when you had no reason to, it has shown me that there are still good men in the world. My father was good, you are good, and I am grateful, even if this is how it ends." Harrison felt something tighten in his chest. He looked at this woman he had known for barely 2 days, this stranger who had ridden into his life on a dying horse, and realized that somewhere in the midst of all this chaos, he had started to care about her, not just as someone who needed protecting, but as a person. As Margaret. "It is not going to end here," he said firmly. "We are going to get out of this. You are going to reclaim your father's ranch, and I am going to help you do it." "Why would you do that?" "Because someone has to, and because I want to." He met her eyes. "These last 8 years I have been alone. I told myself I liked it that way. But the truth is, I have been lonely. So lonely I did not even recognize it anymore. And then you rode into my life and reminded me what it felt like to have someone to care about." Margaret stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. Harrison Pike, are you saying you like me? Despite the danger, despite the 3 killers 50 yards away, Harrison laughed. I suppose I am. Good, because I like you too. Before either of them could say anything else, a new voice called out from the road. Fletcher, Harrison Pike, this is Territorial Ranger Cooper. Lower your weapons. Harrison risked a glance around his rock and felt relief flood through him. 3 men in the distinctive uniform of the Territorial Rangers sat on horseback on the road behind where the Fletchers had taken cover. All 3 had rifles trained on the brothers. Ranger Cooper, Harrison called back. Thank God. These men are wanted for the murder of Margaret Carson in Cedar City 3 days ago. They have been pursuing his daughter to silence her as a witness. That is a lie, James Fletcher shouted. This man is harboring a criminal. Then we will sort it out at the station, Ranger Cooper said calmly. All of you are going to lower your weapons right now and come with us. We will get statements from everyone and figure out what really happened. Anyone who refuses will be considered hostile and treated accordingly. There was a long moment of silence. Harrison could see the Fletchers conferring in low voices. They had to know the game was up. Fighting Territorial Rangers was a death sentence, and even they were not that stupid. All right, James finally called out. We are coming out. The next few minutes were tense but passed without incident. The Fletcher brothers emerged from cover with their hands up and were quickly disarmed and restrained by the Rangers. Harrison and Margaret came down from the ridge, leading their horses. Ranger Cooper was a tall man in his mid-40s with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He looked at Margaret with concern. You must be Margaret Carson. We heard about your father. I am very sorry for your loss. How did you know? Margaret asked. A ranch hand who worked for your father came to us yesterday, told us about the killing and that you had fled. We have been looking for you since then. Cooper glanced at the Fletchers. We also heard that Thomas Fletcher's cousins had ridden out of Cedar City in pursuit. It was not hard to figure out what was happening. Thomas Fletcher is part of this, Harrison said. He covered for his cousins after they killed Carson. We suspected as much. The Territorial Marshal is already in Cedar City dealing with that situation. Cooper gestured toward his horse. Miss Carson, would you be willing to come with us and make a formal statement? With your testimony, we can make sure the Fletchers face justice for what they did. Yes, of course. Margaret looked at Harrison. Will you come with me? All the way, Harrison promised. They rode together to the ranger station, the Fletchers bound and silent in the custody of the Rangers. The sun was fully up now, turning the red rocks into a blazing display of color. Margaret rode close beside Harrison, their horses walking in step. At the station, Margaret gave her full statement to Ranger Cooper and a territorial marshal who had ridden up from the southern part of the territory. She described in detail what had happened at her father's ranch, how the Fletchers had demanded money, how they had shot her father when he refused, and how she had fled for her life. Her testimony was damning and consistent. With additional statements from the ranch hand who had witnessed part of the confrontation and evidence from neighbors who could confirm the Fletchers had been in the area, the case against them was solid. They will hang for this, Ranger Cooper told Margaret quietly. Murder, attempted murder of a witness, and about a dozen other crimes we can prove. You are safe now. They cannot hurt you anymore. Margaret nodded, but she looked exhausted. The reality of everything that had happened was catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Harrison put a steady hand on her shoulder. She needs rest, he said. Is there a hotel in Parowan where she can stay? There is, but Miss Carson, before you go, we need to discuss your father's ranch. The marshal pulled out some papers. As his sole heir, the property passes to you. However, there are some debts outstanding, and you will need to file the proper paperwork with the Territorial Land Office. Do you have anyone who can help you with this? Margaret looked lost. I do not know. The ranch hands, they worked for my father. I do not know if they will stay now that he is gone. I will help her, Harrison said firmly. Whatever she needs. The marshal raised an eyebrow. And you are, Harrison Pike. I own a ranch outside Parowan. Miss Carson came to my property seeking refuge and I gave it to her. I intend to continue helping her as long as she needs it. Something in the marshal's expression shifted, a slight smile touching his weathered face. I see. Well, that is very generous of you, Mr. Pike. Miss Carson is fortunate to have found such a steadfast friend. Friend, Harrison repeated, looking at Margaret. Yes, that is what I am. They left the ranger station in the early afternoon and rode into Parowan proper. It was a small but growing town, with a main street lined with businesses and a few side streets where houses were being built. The hotel was modest but clean, and Harrison paid for a room where Margaret could rest and recover. You do not have to do all this, Margaret said as he carried her saddle and bag up to the room. You have already done so much. I want to. Harrison set her things down and turned to face her. They were alone in the small room, and suddenly the intimacy of the situation struck them both. They had been through so much together in such a short time, had formed a connection that felt deeper than mere circumstance should allow. Harrison, Margaret said softly, what happens now? Now you rest. Tomorrow we will ride down to your father's ranch and take stock of the situation. We will figure out what needs to be done, how to handle the hands, how to settle the debts. We will deal with everything one step at a time. Why are you doing this? Margaret moved closer to him. You could just go back to your ranch and your life. You do not owe me anything. Harrison reached out and gently brushed a strand of dark hair away from her face. The gesture was tender, intimate, and Margaret's breath caught at the touch. I think you know why, he said quietly. Tell me anyway. Because in 2 days, you have become the most important person in my life. Because when I thought the Fletchers might hurt you, I was ready to die to prevent it. Because when I look at you, I see someone strong and brave and real, and I want to know everything about you. I want to help you rebuild your life because I hope maybe I could be part of that life. He paused. If you want me to be. Margaret looked up into his face, seeing the honesty there, the vulnerability behind his steady strength. She raised her hand and placed it against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and fast beneath her palm. I want you to be, she whispered. I know it is too soon. I know I should wait and grieve and be sensible. But Harrison, when I thought they might kill you out there when you turned your horse around to face them alone, my heart stopped. I realized that I could not bear to lose you. Not now, not ever. Harrison cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. Margaret, he breathed, and then he was kissing her. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative and sweet, two people discovering each other. Then Margaret wrapped her arms around his neck and deepened the kiss, and gentleness became passion. Harrison pulled her closer, his strong arms encircling her, and for a long moment the world fell away. There was no danger, no death, no uncertainty. There was only this connection between them, this perfect rightness. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Harrison rested his forehead against hers. That was, he started. Everything, Margaret finished. That was everything. They stood there holding each other for a long time, neither wanting to let go. Finally, Harrison forced himself to step back. You need rest. Real rest. I am going to go take care of the horses and get a room of my own. You could stay here, Margaret said, then blushed at her own boldness. I mean, there is only one bed, but you could sleep in the chair, or I could, or we could. She stopped, flustered. Harrison smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face. Margaret Carson, are you trying to compromise yourself? Maybe I am. She lifted her chin defiantly. Would that be so terrible? It would be improper. You need your rest, and having me here would not help with that. Harrison moved to the door. But I will be right next door if you need anything. And tomorrow we will figure out everything else together. Together, Margaret repeated, liking the sound of that word. Harrison left and Margaret collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but strangely happy. She should be devastated. Her father was dead, her life was in chaos, and she had no idea what the future held. But somehow, impossibly, she felt hopeful, because she was not alone. She had Harrison, and Harrison had her, and together they could face whatever came next. The next morning they rode south toward the Carson ranch. Margaret had slept deeply for the first time in days, and though grief still weighed on her, she felt stronger. Harrison rode beside her, his presence a constant reassurance. The ranch, when they reached it, looked abandoned. The house was locked up tight, and there were no signs of the hands who had worked there. Margaret's face fell as she took in the empty corrals and silent barn. "They are all gone," she said quietly. "Maybe. Let's look around." They dismounted and began exploring. Inside the barn, they found evidence that someone had been there recently. Fresh horse droppings, hay scattered around, a lantern still half full of oil. "Someone is still coming here," Harrison observed. "Maybe one of the hands checking on things." As if summoned by his words, a voice called out from behind them. "Miss Margaret, that you?" They turned to see an older man emerging from one of the outbuildings. He was weathered and bow-legged, with white hair and a face like old leather. Margaret's face lit up. "Tom, you stayed." "Course I stayed. Someone had to look after the place until you came back." Tom limped over, his eyes taking in Harrison with frank curiosity. "Heard what happened with the Fletchers. Heard you got away clean and they are locked up in Parowan. Glad you are all right, miss. This is Harrison Pike." "He helped me, saved my life actually." Margaret gestured between them. "Harrison, this is Tom Lawson. He has worked for my father for 10 years. The two men shook hands, sizing each other up. Harrison saw a man who was loyal and capable despite his age. Tom saw a man who clearly cared deeply for Margaret and approved. "Place needs work," Tom said bluntly. Other hands cleared out soon as word spread about Mr. Carson. They did not want to stick around with no one to pay their wages. But the cattle are still here, and the buildings are sound. It could be up and running again if someone takes charge. Margaret looked around at the ranch that had been her home, feeling overwhelmed. "I do not know if I can do this alone." "You are not alone," Harrison said firmly. He looked at Tom. "If Miss Carson decides to keep this ranch running, would you be willing to stay on and help? With proper wages, of course." "I would. This is my home, too." Tom looked at Margaret. "Your pa was a good man, miss. I would be honored to help you carry on his legacy." "What about other hands?" "Can we hire more?" Margaret asked. Tom rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Maybe. Be hard for them to take orders from a woman, no offense, miss. But if she had a man standing with her, a partner or husband, that might be different." There was a loaded silence. Tom's meaning was clear and not even subtle. Margaret felt her cheeks warm, but Harrison just laughed. "You are not wrong, Tom, but let's take this one step at a time." Harrison turned to Margaret. "Do you want to keep this ranch, or would you rather sell it and start fresh somewhere else?" Margaret looked around at the land her father had worked so hard to build. She thought about his dreams, his hopes for the future. She thought about what he would want her to do. "I want to keep it," she said firmly. "Papa loved this place. He would want me to carry on." "Then that is what we will do." Harrison's voice was decisive. "Tom, can you give us a tour? Show us what needs to be fixed, what debts are outstanding, what the cattle situation looks like. We need to know exactly what we are dealing with." They spent the rest of the day going over every aspect of the ranch. The situation was challenging, but not impossible. Robert Carson had been a prudent man who did not take on more debt than he could handle. There were some outstanding bills with merchants in Cedar City, but nothing that could not be paid off with the sale of some cattle. The herd itself was in good shape, about 200 head of mixed beef cattle grazing in the northern pastures. The horses were solid working stock. The buildings needed some repairs, but nothing major. With work and smart management, the ranch could be profitable. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the Carson house watching the sun set, Harrison laid out a plan. "We can make this work, but it will take both of us. I can merge my herd with yours, bring over some of my horses. We can hire a couple more hands, maybe young guys who do not have the prejudices of older cowboys. Tom can be foreman. Between the two ranches, we will have enough land and livestock to be really successful. You would do that?" "Merge your ranch with mine." Margaret looked at him in amazement. "If you will have me, yes." Harrison took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Margaret, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I also know that what I feel for you is real. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want to face whatever challenges come our way together." Margaret felt tears pricking her eyes, but they were good tears. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Harrison slid off the bench where they sat and knelt in front of her, still holding her hand. "Margaret Carson, will you marry me? Will you let me stand beside you as we build this ranch together? Will you let me love you for the rest of my life?" "Yes," Margaret said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it. Yes to everything." Harrison stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they broke apart, both were smiling widely. Tom, who had been discreetly working in the barn, chose that moment to emerge and caught sight of them. "About time," he called out with a grin. "I will start planning where to put the new bunkhouse for the extra hands." They were married 3 weeks later in Parowan, in a simple ceremony attended by the few neighbors and friends Margaret had, by Tom and the 2 young ranch hands they had hired, and by Ranger Cooper, who had become something of a friend during the process of testifying against the Fletchers. Margaret wore a simple dress of blue calico that Harrison had bought for her in town, and Harrison wore his best suit that he had not put on since leaving Illinois. They stood before the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, and they spoke their vows with absolute conviction. "I, Harrison Pike, take you, Margaret Carson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you in all things, for as long as we both shall live. I, Margaret Carson, take you, Harrison Pike, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and build a life with you, for as long as we both shall live." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Harrison kissed Margaret with such tender passion that several of the witnesses wiped away tears. Tom clapped loudly, and the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. They held a small celebration at the ranch that evening, with food and drink and music from a fiddle player Tom knew. Margaret danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling happier than she had ever thought possible just a month ago. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked as they swayed together. "I am more than happy. I am content. I am home." Margaret rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you for riding into my life. I think you have that backwards. You rode into mine. Either way, I am glad we found each other. So am I, Mrs. Pike, so am I." The first year of their marriage was not easy. Merging 2 ranches took enormous work. There were fences to mend and rebuild, cattle to move, supplies to purchase, and 100 other details that required attention. Harrison moved his belongings from his old house to the Carson Ranch, which became the Pike Ranch in all but name. They kept both properties but lived at the larger homestead where Margaret had grown up. Tom proved invaluable as foreman, and the 2 young hands they hired, brothers named Sam and Will Thornton, were hard workers who took instruction well. Harrison had been right that younger men were more willing to take orders from Margaret. They respected her knowledge and treated her as a full partner in the ranch operations. Margaret threw herself into the work with fierce determination. She was up before dawn every day, working alongside Harrison and the hands. She could rope and brand as well as any of them, could judge cattle quality with an expert eye, and kept the books with meticulous precision. Harrison was constantly amazed by her strength and capability. But it was not all work. In the evenings, they made time for each other. They would sit on the porch watching the sun set, talking about their days, their plans, their dreams. Harrison would tell stories about his time as a scout during the war, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. Margaret would share memories of her father, keeping his presence alive through the stories. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other in the most intimate ways. Their passion was matched only by their tenderness. Harrison was always careful with Margaret, always attentive to her needs and desires. Margaret, in turn, showed him what it meant to be truly loved, to be accepted completely for who he was. "I love you," she would whisper in the darkness as they lay tangled together. "I love you more," he would respond, kissing her forehead. "Impossible. Want to bet?" And they would laugh and love and fall asleep in each other's arms, two people who had found in each other everything they needed. The trial of the Fletcher brothers took place that fall in the territorial courthouse. Margaret had to testify again, reliving the horror of her father's murder. It was difficult and painful, but Harrison sat beside her the entire time, his hand holding hers, his presence giving her strength. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. James, William, and Cyrus Fletcher were sentenced to hang. Thomas Fletcher, the marshal who had covered for his cousins, was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. "It is over," Margaret said quietly as they left the courthouse. "Finally, it is over." "Your father has justice," Harrison agreed. "You can let go of the anger now. You can just live." And she did. With the trial behind her and the ranch thriving, Margaret felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She could think about her father now without the sharp pain of his murder overwhelming everything else. She could remember the good times, the lessons he had taught her, the love he had shown her. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the end of their first year of marriage, they had increased the herd to over 400 head and had purchased additional grazing land to the north. They built a new barn and renovated the house, adding a second story with extra bedrooms. "Why do we need extra bedrooms?" Margaret had asked when Harrison proposed the addition. Harrison had smiled and pulled her close. "Because I am hoping we will fill them with children someday, if you want that too." Margaret had kissed him soundly. "I want that very much." Their first child, a son, was born in the spring of 1874, almost exactly 2 years after Margaret had ridden into Harrison's life. They named him Robert Harrison Pike, after Margaret's father and his own. The baby had Margaret's green eyes and Harrison's dark hair, and both parents were completely besotted. Harrison proved to be a natural father. He was patient and gentle with little Robert, rocking him to sleep at night when the baby was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with such obvious adoration that Margaret would sometimes tear up watching them together. "You are going to spoil him," she would tease. "Absolutely," Harrison would agree without shame. "That is my job as a father." Margaret herself was surprised by how much she loved being a mother. She had worried that she would feel trapped or constrained, that the demands of a baby would overwhelm her. But instead, she found new strength. She continued to work the ranch, now with Robert strapped to her back in a cradle board that Harrison had fashioned. The baby seemed to love being outside, would coo happily while his mother worked. Tom, now in his 60s but still going strong, appointed himself unofficial grandfather to young Robert. He carved the boy toys from wood, told him stories, and declared that the child would grow up to be the finest rancher in Utah Territory. When Robert was 18 months old, Margaret discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the baby was a girl, born in the winter of 1876 during a snowstorm that nearly prevented the doctor from reaching the ranch in time. They named her Hannah Margaret Pike, after Harrison's sister and her mother. Hannah was different from Robert from the start. Where he had been a calm, easygoing baby, she was fierce and demanding. She had Harrison's brown eyes and a head full of dark curls, and she ruled the household from the moment she arrived. "She is going to be trouble," Harrison said lovingly, cradling his tiny daughter. "She is going to be amazing," Margaret corrected. "Like her father." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growing of their family. In 1878, they welcomed twins, a boy and girl they named Thomas and Sarah. The ranch hands joked that the Pike family was going to populate the entire territory at this rate. The ranch itself had become one of the most successful operations in southern Utah. Harrison and Margaret had developed a reputation for fair dealing, quality livestock, and innovative ranching techniques. They were respected throughout the territory, and young ranchers would often come to them for advice. In 1880, the territorial legislature finally granted women the right to vote in Utah, and Margaret was one of the first women in Iron County to cast a ballot. Harrison accompanied her to the polling place, his pride in his wife evident to everyone who saw them. "How does it feel to make history?" he asked as they rode home. "It feels like it should have happened a long time ago," Margaret replied, "but I am glad to be part of it." The children grew quickly, as children do. Robert developed into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the cattle and learning everything he could about ranching. Hannah was wild and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble and charming her way out of it. The twins were inseparable, a matched set who communicated in their own secret language. Harrison and Margaret watched their children grow with pride and wonder. On quiet evenings, after the kids were in bed, they would sit together on the porch just as they had in the early days of their marriage, marveling at how their lives had turned out. "You ever think about that day I rode onto your property?" Margaret asked one such evening. "About how everything could have gone so differently." "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I had turned you away, if I had been too scared or too selfish to help. But you did not. You helped me without question. You gave me safety and your name and your heart." Harrison pulled her closer. "And you gave me everything I did not know I needed. You gave me love, family, purpose. You made me whole again." "We made each other whole," Margaret corrected softly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, they could hear Tom's voice as he told the children a story before bed. The cattle lowed in the pastures. A hawk circled overhead. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared and thousands more they would share in the years to come. The Wild West was slowly being tamed around them. Railroads were spreading across the territory. Towns were growing. Utah was on the path to statehood. But here on their ranch, time seemed to move at its own pace, measured not in minutes and hours but in seasons and generations. In 1882, Tom Lawson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. The entire county turned out for his funeral, a testament to how beloved he had been. Harrison and Margaret wept openly as they buried their friend and mentor on the ranch property, beneath an oak tree where he had often sat and carved toys for the children. "He was family," Margaret said through her tears. "He stayed when everyone else left. He believed in me when no one else did." "He loved you like a daughter," Harrison agreed. "And he died knowing that you had succeeded, that the ranch your father built was thriving. That is a good legacy." They promoted Sam Thornton to foreman, and he proved as capable as Tom had been. The ranch continued to prosper under his management and their oversight. More children came, 2 more sons born in 1883 and 1885, named after Harrison's father and Margaret's uncle respectively. Their house was always full of noise and laughter, muddy boots and children's toys. Harrison, now in his late 40s, had gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. But he was still strong and vital, could still work a full day alongside men half his age. He had found his purpose in this life with Margaret, in building something that would last beyond them. Margaret, in her mid-30s, had grown into a formidable woman. She ran the ranch with skill and confidence, commanded respect from everyone who knew her, and raised her children with a firm but loving hand. The frightened young woman who had ridden onto Harrison's property all those years ago seemed like a different person, though sometimes Harrison could still see glimpses of her in Margaret's eyes. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1882, Harrison surprised Margaret with a trip to Salt Lake City. They left the children in Sam's capable care and took the train north, something neither of them had done before. For 5 days, they were not ranchers or parents, just a couple in love exploring a new place. They stayed in a real hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights. They went to restaurants and theaters. They walked through the city holding hands like young sweethearts. It was magical, a brief escape from the responsibilities of their everyday lives. On their last night, Harrison took Margaret to an elegant restaurant overlooking the city. As they ate, he presented her with a small box. "What is this?" Margaret opened it to find a beautiful gold locket inlaid with turquoise. "Open it," Harrison urged. Inside were 2 tiny photographs. On one side was a picture of the 6 children. On the other was a photograph of Margaret and Harrison on their wedding day that they had not even known existed until Ranger Cooper had sent it to them years later. "Harrison," Margaret breathed, tears filling her eyes. "It is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you. Not as beautiful as the life we have built together." Harrison reached across the table and took her hand. "Margaret, these last 10 years have been the best of my life. Every day I wake up grateful that you rode into my life. Every day I fall more in love with you. I love you too, so much." Margaret stood and moved around the table to kiss him, not caring that they were in a fancy restaurant with other diners watching. "You are the best man I have ever known. The best husband, the best father, the best partner. I would not change a single thing about our life together." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. And there were always challenges. Droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, the endless work that came with running a successful ranch. But they faced everything together, as they always had. The children grew into young adults. Robert, at 16, was already taller than his father and showed every sign of becoming an excellent rancher in his own right. Harrison began teaching him the business side of operations, preparing him to eventually take over. Hannah, at 14, was still wild but showed an unexpected talent for training horses. She could gentle even the most stubborn animals, had a gift for understanding what they needed. Margaret and Harrison encouraged her passion, knowing their daughter would need her own path. The twins, Tom and Sarah, were 10 now and starting to develop their own distinct personalities. Tom loved books and wanted to be a teacher someday. Sarah had inherited her mother's head for numbers and enjoyed helping with the ranch accounts. The two youngest boys, still just children, ran wild over the property under the watchful eyes of their parents and older siblings. They were being raised in a home full of love and laughter, security and purpose. They would never know the fear and desperation their mother had experienced, would never understand how close they had come to never existing at all. In 1887, Utah was finally granted statehood. The Pike family traveled to the celebrations in Salt Lake City, part of the crowd of thousands who gathered to witness history. Margaret stood with her arm around Harrison's waist, her children surrounding them, and felt a profound sense of belonging. This was her home. These were her people. This was the life she had built from ashes and terror, from a desperate ride to a stranger's ranch and a man's simple decision to do the right thing. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked, always attuned to her moods. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we are." Margaret looked up at her husband, this man who had given her everything. "I am thinking about how one moment, one decision can change everything. I am grateful every day that you chose my ranch to ride to, that of all the places you could have gone, you came to me. I think I was meant to find you. I think fate or destiny or God, whatever you want to call it, brought us together." Margaret smiled. "And I am so grateful it did." They watched the fireworks that night with their children, 6 beautiful lives they had created together, evidence of their love made manifest. The sky exploded in colors, celebrating the birth of a new state, the promise of a new future. But for Harrison and Margaret Pike, the future had arrived years ago on a dusty day when a woman on a dying horse had ridden into a ranch desperate for refuge, and a lonely cowboy had given her safety and his name. Everything else, all the joy and love and family that followed, had grown from that single moment of choice. Years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by birthdays and anniversaries, by losses and gains. Harrison's hair turned fully gray, then white. Margaret developed laugh lines around her eyes and silver threading through her dark hair. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year into something solid and unshakable. Robert married at 21 and brought his bride, a sweet-natured girl from Parowan named Alice, to live on the ranch. They gave Harrison and Margaret their first grandchild in 1891, a boy they named Harrison Carson Pike Roman II. The cycle was beginning again, a new generation to carry on the legacy. Hannah, true to her independent nature, started her own horse training business at 19. She never married, declaring that horses were far more reliable than men, but she was happy and successful. She built a small house on the property and worked alongside her family. The twins both went to school in Salt Lake City. Tom became a teacher as he had dreamed, while Sarah married a banker and moved east. The two youngest sons both chose to stay on the ranch, learning the trade from their father and oldest brother. By the time Harrison turned 60 in 1890, the Pike Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the new state of Utah. They employed over a dozen hands, ran over 1,000 head of cattle, and had a thriving horse breeding program thanks to Hannah's expertise. The ranch had grown from 2 struggling properties into something that would last for generations. But success, wealth, and legacy were not what mattered most to Harrison. What mattered were the quiet mornings when he woke with Margaret in his arms, the evenings on the porch watching the sunset, the family dinners with children and grandchildren gathered around the table, the simple moments of an extraordinary life built on love and partnership. In 1895, on a warm spring evening much like the one when they had first met, Harrison and Margaret sat together on the porch of their home. They were both in their 60s now, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work. But their hands were still entwined, their hearts still beat in rhythm with each other. "You have any regrets?" Margaret asked suddenly. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Harrison thought about it seriously, as he always took her questions. "No," he finally said. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, led us to this life. How could I regret any of it, even the hard parts, the drought of '78? When we lost half the herd and thought we might lose the ranch, even that, because we got through it together, and it made us stronger." Harrison lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Margaret, if I could go back and live my life over, knowing everything that would happen, I would not change a thing. I would still be standing in that yard when you rode in. I would still offer you refuge. I would still fall in love with you and ask you to marry me. Because this, right here, this is everything I ever wanted." Margaret felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "You gave me a new life when mine had ended. You gave me family and purpose and love. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Harrison Pike. And you, Margaret Pike, are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The ranch spread out around them, land they had worked and loved and passed down to their children. In the distance, they could hear the laughter of grandchildren playing before bedtime. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the cattle or the business, but the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the life they had built from nothing but courage and compassion. The woman had ridden into his ranch desperate for refuge. The lonely cowboy had given her safety and his name. But in the end, they had given each other so much more. They had given each other everything that mattered: love, partnership, purpose, and a happily ever after that had lasted a lifetime and would echo through the generations to come. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Harrison pulled Margaret closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, right where it belonged. They sat in perfect contentment, two people who had found their home not in a place but in each other, and they knew with absolute certainty that they would spend the rest of their days exactly like this, together, in love, and grateful for every moment fate had given them. The Wild West was fading into history around them, but the love story of Harrison and Margaret Pike would endure, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a testament to what could happen when a desperate woman found a good man willing to help, and two lonely souls discovered they were meant to walk through life hand in hand. And they lived happily, truly and completely, ever after.